listening to Beyond Wellness Radio, bringing you the cutting edge in health, nutrition, and sports performance. Stay up to date and listen anywhere, anytime on your computer, tablet, or smartphone by subscribing on iTunes. Catch your hosts, Dr. Justin Marchegiani and Baris Harvey, as they answer your burning health questions as well as interviews from world-renowned guest experts. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond Wellness Radio. Before we go into today's show, I want to tell you guys about the newsletter. Go to beyondwellnessradio.com and hit the newsletter sign up. By doing this, you will never miss out on an episode. Be the first one to hear it as it's sent out to your inbox each week. You want any more? Right above, there's a tab for Justin Health, and that's where you can go straight to Dr. Justin's website, and he has a free consultation available for you guys that want to get much deeper look. He also has a free video series on thyroid health, so make sure you guys dive in. Also, we would love for you guys to go ahead and give us a review on iTunes. That'd be awesome. But to prove it to you that we deserve that review, we're going to give you some awesome stuff today. So first of all, how's it going today, Dr. Justin?
Baris, it's going great today, man. It's right in the middle of winter, and Austin, Texas has great weather. It's 75 degrees and just beautiful and sunny. And I know being a Boston boy growing up, they gotten like 3 or 4 feet of snow this month alone. So feeling really happy I'm not in the Northeast.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm the same thing here. It's really warm. I'm thinking to myself, it would be a good thing to have some rainfall, but I mean, I'm kind of spoiled out here, and I know people in New York, they're a little chilly right now in that snow, so I can't complain.
Exactly.
Yeah. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about vitamin D, and not only, it covers so much, whether that's, hormone influence of your immune system. We're going to be a little bit more particular on the immune boosting benefits, but we're going to basically break down vitamin D, make sure we're answering, most of your guys' questions on it and getting kind of that foundation. But before we go into that, what did you eat for breakfast?
Baris, today was just kind of a simple day, man. It was just 4 eggs, sunny side up. I know this is kind of, my Fridays tend to be, because this is when we record the podcast, tend to be similar. A little bit of collagen, some eggs that were just sunny side up, a piece of pasture-fed bacon, and some coffee with butter and MCT. And I'm rocking it. I took some, right now I'm stacking up my supplements a little bit differently. I'm using a combination of ashwagandha and eleuthero at relatively higher doses. And I'm also on a brain program where I'm adding in 5-HTP and L-tyrosine, and my brain just feels amazing. Like I've been getting, and I'm going to admit it to everyone, I haven't been good this week. I've been getting about 6 to 7 hours night sleep. So I know I preach getting 8 and getting to bed before 11. I've been off. So even I can make mistakes, but I've been feeling darn good, where in the past I wouldn't have felt as good in the morning. And I really attribute it to, I think, adding in these new adaptogenic herbs, but also adding in the brain program, adding in some of the sulfur amino acids, and the combination of the 5-HTP and L-tyrosine together really has made a big difference for me.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because I was just, especially that last interview that you guys, will be hearing, really into like the brain stuff and the brain supplementation and how we can improve that. And like you said, we preach that you should be getting 8 hours of sleep, but this past week I haven't been the best on that either.
Yeah.
There have been some days I've been getting more sleep, but going to sleep pretty late, but making sure that, okay, how do I kind of whatever I might have lost, because you're never gonna get as much as you could have with sleep, but how could I try to make sure I maximize the nutrients that I put in my body that would give me maybe something I would have got when I slept. You know what I mean? So
exactly.
Try to level it out. And then when you do get that full 8 hours sleep and then put that on top of it, it's just icing on the cake.
Love it. Love it, man.
Definitely. So myself, I don't want to just, keep it boring, because, again, I didn't eat breakfast, but I'll tell you what I'm about to eat after.
Nice.
I will have some organic beef sausage with some eggs, and that will probably be it. It'll probably be something simple like that. Mornings are simple because you got stuff to do, you got to get things out the way. So if you don't have like an allergy to eggs, like eggs are amazing. And they don't have to just be for breakfast food. So,
Exactly, man. Love it.
and you know what else? They have a fair amount of vitamin D. So,
Decent bet. Absolutely. On that
so
note.
on that note, I've been hearing some things with vitamin D. People try to put it into a certain category, and maybe it doesn't even need to be stuck into one category. But is it a vitamin or is it a hormone? What's going on with that?
So I would consider vitamin D or vitamin D3 as like a pre-hormone. Vitamin D, activated vitamin D or calcitriol is going to be a hormone for sure. It's going to have hormone-like effects. It's going to affect essentially various immune cells. It upregulates this antimicrobial peptide called cathelicidin, which is really cool. It has effects on about 800 different genes, right? I think we only have like 20 to 24,000 genes. So it's got like a pretty big effect on about 5% of your genes. That's pretty awesome. So it affects your natural antibiotics in your body. It affects your immune system. It affects your genetics. And one of the big things with vitamin D, it's going to be a hormone, even though it's a vitamin. And what's happening is we're taking vitamin D3 through our skin and through supplements, and we're converting it via our liver and kidneys.
Mm-hmm. And is that conversion still happening? Is it the same when it's through our skin? Is it still getting converted through our liver?
Well, there's various sterols that get secreted when you're getting sunlight versus the supplement. So when you're taking a supplement, we're just getting vitamin D3 or cholecalciferol. That's vitamin D3. Mm-hmm. Now we have vitamin D2, which is ergocalciferol. That's more synthetic, kind of made in the lab, plant-based kind of thing. Like your vegans and stuff are going to be more on the vitamin D2, but you're going to get better absorption with vitamin D3, and it's the same vitamin D3 that's made by the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Now with the sun, though, I'm going to recommend sun being the best, but let's just face it, it's not going to be practical for a lot of people, especially if the maximum time frame to get vitamin D is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., right? That's where the angle of the sun, and maybe through March and October are the prime parts of the year. So if you're outside of those parts of the year, or if you're in an area with a higher latitude, not everyone can live in sunny Santa Cruz, right?
Yeah.
And let's say you got to work like everyone else here does in the world, then you may have to be relying on a vitamin D3 supplement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And it kind of saddens me to say this, but because Santa Cruz is so amazing. But I recently just moved back to the Bay Area, so just for the listeners, I'll let you guys know that. But yeah, it is beautiful, and like you said, sometimes it is hard if we're supposed to be outside, kind of, going along with this paleo concept. Like we've evolved to kind of be one with the sun, and the sun powers everything on this planet, including humans, right? And it's hard when most of us are inside a facility working somewhere, whether that be a desk job or inside of a building or even at home from those peak hours, unless you might get an hour lunch right between there. But for the majority of people, like you mentioned, we can't just, go to work shirtless.
Exactly. So getting back to vitamin D, Baris, I kind of wanted to just break down the physiology and the biochemistry of what's happening here.
Yeah, definitely. So break it down. We ingest it, and what's the next step?
So when we're getting sun, right, we're taking the cholesterol in our skin and we're turning it into pre-vitamin D3, and that vitamin D3 is going to get converted by our liver into 25-hydroxy vitamin D, or calcidiol. So we can call it calcidiol just to keep it simple. And that calcidiol gets converted by our kidneys to 125-hydroxy vitamin D, or just to keep it simple, we have calcitriol, which is the active one. Mm-hmm. So we have pre-vitamin D3 going to the liver, making calcidiol, going to the kidneys and spitting out calcitriol. And again, we're going to be making some other different sterols and such when we get sun. So sun's going to be your ideal exposure. Just when we're getting sun, just get your skin pink. Don't get burned. Mm-hmm. The scientific literature's got this funky word called median erythemal dose. And basically, we just convert that into layman speak. Just get a little bit pink. Now, obviously, you got darker skin bearer, so that may not happen for you. But like I'm fair skinned, so just a little bit pink. I'm just curious with yourself, do you see a pigment change at all when you know you're saturated?
I get dark.
Okay.
I've luckily I have a nice balance to where I can basically accumulate a very nice tan. It basically depends. I've probably gotten burnt in my life 2 or 3 times. One of the times was, being on Lake Tahoe. It's overcast, you can't really tell. There's the waters all around, all the reflection. I got burnt then pretty bad, but for the most part, I can, be outside for a long amount of time without worrying about it too much.
Yeah, and then just kind of talking about pigment, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea of how we evolved pigment in our skin is just based on where we evolved on the equator, right?
Yeah.
So I evolved in areas that probably were higher latitude. Therefore, my body was like, all right, we need to have just enough melanin so we can make vitamin D. And you evolved at a place probably closer to the equator, and you had more melanin. So just think of melanin or the pigment on your skin as just natural sunblock. So
Exactly.
some people have more sunblock because they evolved in hotter environments with, a kind of more UV radiation from the sun. They're at a lower latitude. And then some people like myself evolved, let's say Austria, Italy, Irish kind of genes at a higher equator level, not quite as intense sun. So therefore, I don't have as much of my internal sunblock, if you will.
Yeah, you could almost think of it almost like, whether that be the iris of your eye or the aperture of a camera, how much light you're allowing to go in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So like if you're in a place where there's not that much light, right? The same way when it's dark outside, your pupils, they get bigger to try to accept, like, come in light, I need more so that way I can see. Whereas if you're getting an excess of it, there's too much exposure, you go from barely waking up and you turn the lights on your eyes, you can see them kind of readjust and recalibrate. People with darker skins, they have that natural sunblock. And it's always funny to me how some people will tell me, oh, well, see, that's why you'll have a higher chance of getting skin cancer because you don't notice it, that you got to put it on. You don't notice it because you have darker skin. You won't get burnt right away, but you're gonna get skin cancer not putting sunblock on. And I'm like, I haven't really heard too many people of darker skin getting skin cancer. I mean, there's other traits from my descent that I worry about. Maybe like high blood pressure and some other things that might run in my genealogy, but skin cancer is generally not one of them.
Yeah, and people don't really understand, the mechanism of skin cancer. So if we're getting excessively burned, yeah, we're going to have a risk of skin cancer, but then the question is what kind, right? Like this is, like the devil's all in the details. So when you get burned more, you're going to be at higher risk for squamous or basal cell carcinoma. Guess what? Basal and squamous cell carcinoma really don't kill people. They're very easy to treat. You just go to the dermatologist. They just cut it out. You're pretty darn good. It's going to be the melanoma that you got to worry about. And guess what? When it comes to melanoma, it tends to occur on areas that never even get exposed to the sun.
Yeah. And it's a little bit more deeper than your squamous cells, which are closer to the higher areas, like you mentioned. Like the melanoma was not really that direct sun getting hit kind of thing. So yeah,
tend to be in areas that never get exposure. And then there's also some research out there, some epidemiological research. And again, this can't prove causation, but they're just finding the more sun exposure, the less melanoma. And the hypothesis behind that really is just vitamin D. And I think we can say that vitamin D is definitely a causal in decreasing cancer because we have so many other studies showing the decreased cancer risk factors with higher vitamin D. We're able to show the ability to control genes with vitamin D, how it affects your T regulatory cells, which helps balance your immune system. It helps with these antimicrobial peptides, cathelicidin. It helps with your immune response. So we know that cancer is an immune issue, right? It's our immune system can't control these cells, right? It can't create apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So if these cells go out of control, they start growing, well, you're going to start seeing, over 5 or 10 years, maybe even longer, a tumor. So if we can keep our immune system super smart, or if I'm from Boston, I'll just say wicked smart, we're gonna keep our immune system in check, which will then keep our cells in check just via apoptosis. And then also, the diet stuff. And we'll touch upon the diet in this podcast. But again, they've done studies. I have it on one of my blogs that you consume glucose, you're going to decrease your immune system 50% for up to 5 or 6 hours. And that's 100 grams of glucose. What if you have a Coke and then maybe have your cereal and then an orange juice or something all within a couple hours? Man, your immune system is shut down for days. And what if you live your life this way? Then you're doubly screwed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So with that being said, because we kind of mentioned a little bit of the pathways, right? So we take it mostly from the sun through our skin, but also dietary intake. We're getting some from our meat. Actually, we didn't. How do we get it dietarily besides supplements?
Well, we're not going to get too much dietarily. We'll get a little bit from fish, a little bit from mushrooms, a little bit from cod liver oil, like things like that. You're not going to get a ton dietarily. Like at the most, I want to say you can get probably maybe 1,000 IUs if you're on point. But again, that may not be enough if you're severely deficient, or if you're not getting outside much, or it's the winter. I mean, we know seasonal affective disorder and vitamin D are connected, right? That's just you feeling blues in the wintertime, those winter blues.
Exactly. And another thing you mentioned with the, the consumption amount, that's like optimal rates, right? And even if you are getting outside and it's sunny, we're not walking outside naked, right? Like
I know,
right? We're still for the most part, like maybe we have a short sleeve shirt. Maybe not. Maybe we're dressed in our dress clothes, right, to go to work or something like that, and we have our head and our hands exposed, but there's so much more body area that's not getting hit. So it would really have to be like on optimal conditions to get it through your food and also from the sun.
Exactly, man. And that's the thing with vitamin D is, we got to talk about amounts too. So we have like our general levels, which would be like right around 50. I want to say it's ng per ml. I always get the reference range a little confused, but I think it's ng per ml.
Mm-hmm.
So 50 is a pretty good level for your average person. If you have an autoimmune condition or you have any family history of cancer, you just want to be, careful. I recommend getting it closer to 70 to 100. If you have any of those risk factors. I don't think there's any issue with safety on that. The Vitamin D Council recommends up to 100 with certain people with autoimmune conditions. So that's a pretty good reference range to go by.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Now, so with that being said, how could someone get this tested?
Great question. So there's a couple ways. We already talked about the calcidiol and the calcitriol, aka 25-hydroxy vitamin D and 1,25-hydroxy vitamin D. So in general, 25-hydroxy vitamin D is going to be your gold standard blood test to see where your vitamin D is at. Now, if you have parathyroid issues, or you have maybe chronic infections, or just chronically ill, getting the 125-hydroxy vitamin D will also be helpful to look at, because you want to make sure your 25-hydroxy and your 125-hydroxy are relatively about the same. So if you're pumping out about 50 or 60 units on the 25-hydroxy, you want to be about the same 50 to 60 on the 125. Now the 125-hydroxy, or the calcitriol, if you will, is going to be your active form of vitamin D. Okay? So one thing we see when people have infections or are chronically ill, we see the 125-hydroxy vitamin D skew up. I had a patient this last week. We ran 25 and 125-hydroxy. We saw the 125 super high. So the question is, what's happening? So what is happening essentially is there's vitamin D receptor site down regulation. So it's kind of like with insulin resistance, the receptor site becomes resistant to the hormone, meaning you need more insulin to bring blood sugar into the cell.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same thing happens with vitamin D. We need more 125-hydroxy vitamin D to have the same receptor cell effect. So we'll see when we run 25, we'll see it at 40 or 50, and then we'll see the 125 up well into the hundreds. So we see this big skew with the immune system, and the body's doing that because it's not having the immune effect of that vitamin D hitting the receptor site and, allowing it to do what it needs to do.
Yeah, definitely. I'll probably think of a better analogy right now, but one thing that made me think of it, kind of, I mean, the same thing as the insulin, but when a certain receptor cell is like not almost not accepting of the nutrient that's being provided, it's almost like when you're trying to feed a baby and they're just like so resistant, they keep turning their head like, no, I don't want it, I don't want to eat, I don't want to eat. But that doesn't mean you don't have enough of the certain substrate. You know what I mean? So
Exactly.
that's kind of the thing that first, maybe I'll get a better one, more refined. But the first thing that pops into my mind was like, oh, like a little kid that's like rejecting food. It's there, right? And then so you want to make sure that you are getting the right test. And for the most part, I know there are definitely some in-home testing and testing that you can run with your functional practitioner, but could you get this from your normal medical doctor? Just
Yeah, you could probably ask. Yeah, you could probably ask that. Most of them, they're getting a little more hip to it. Again, when you deal with conventional medicine, they tend to be, I don't want to sound jaded, but they tend to be like 10 or 20 years behind the curve.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is, if you're having a hard time, just feel free to reach out to me. These tests are pretty inexpensive, even if you're doing cash.
Yeah.
I mean, I can get these tests done for $30 or $40. And it's totally worth it. Definitely worth getting it done once a year just to make sure you're on point.
Yeah, definitely. And I know like even you mentioned earlier the vitamincouncil.org. I'm pretty sure they have links to where you can get in-home testing. But normally, yeah, your doctor usually has that. Sometimes it's even baseline nowadays where you can get a vitamin D test. So when you do your normal checkup, it's probably a good idea to go ahead and do that. Now, the reference range, might be a little bit different. It might have this really wide array of what's considered acceptable. But as long as you're getting it done, you know where you need to be. You can see it on paper.
Exactly.
But if you're listed at like 15 or 20, they might not think it's necessarily an issue.
Exactly. So I just want to touch back upon the 125-25 hydroxy vitamin D. So I kind of talked about this vitamin D receptor numbness or downregulation. Okay, so if you're a person and you're taking vitamin D and then you're testing your vitamin D and it's not moving upward, there's a chance that your 125 is shooting up and your 25 is not. You're not building a reservoir with the 25 because it's all going downstream to the 125 or from the calcidiol to the calcitriol. So it's very possible that is the case, and we see that with inflammation and these chronic infections. So if that's the case, make sure you're running the 125 hydroxy vitamin D along with the 25, because that way you're not going to be continuing to push more and more vitamin D thinking that that's going to be the right solution.
Right. You can't just stuff more stuff down the toilet, expect it to get to flush. You got to actually fix the problem that's going on.
So the deeper question is why. So we know that infections, right, inflammation, these things are going to cause that receptor site to be more numb. So moving forward, we want to look at intercellular infections, right? Infections in the blood, infections in the body that could be creating or deforming that vitamin D receptor. So we know, for instance, one infection, mono or Epstein-Barr virus is one of the viruses that, and cytomegalovirus, CMV, is one of the viruses that causes mononucleosis. So there's research showing that it will actually derange the vitamin D receptor site. And there's also some research showing that resveratrol, which is like this antioxidant bioflavonoid, will actually help the vitamin D receptor site. So one school of thought out there is, giving some extra resveratrol to help the vitamin D receptor site so it can work better. That's kind of like palliative in my opinion. It's like a Band-Aid over, it's like an ice pack on your head because you're just slamming it into the wall every day. The question would be, well, why did the receptor site downregulate? And we have to go back to the inflammation and the infection. So the underlying cause, right, it's always the best thing to be at the underlying cause. The underlying cause is to get the infection treated. But in that process, I see it being totally okay adding some resveratrol, some of these antioxidant bioflavonoids to help kind of get the receptor site back into action so it can work a little better. I haven't seen too much on blood work. I've looked at it a few times. I haven't seen it worked terribly well where you see a drop in it. But I think there's some evidence in the scientific literature, and I actually posted this on my Facebook, one of these scientific articles on this over a year and a half ago, and just want to touch upon it now with it being in the winter. And I did a couple of videos on vitamin D recently, and I want to add this element to it, the infection element and the vitamin D receptor cell downregulation, and just things you can do, right? Number 1, resveratrol. Number 2, address the infection, address the intercellular infection.
Yeah, definitely. See, and what's super important about what you mentioned right there is that it's not just one or the other. And I know that often sometimes people, think, they go to their Western medical doc and it's like, okay, I'm just going to get a Band-Aid. But then they might go over here to the functional medicine and say, oh, well, I'm going to get to the root cause, but in the meantime feel like crap. But no, that's not the case. We want to make sure that we do want to find what's the deepest bottom thing, that's wreaking havoc, because you don't want to just keep, rinsing and repeating if the thing is broken. We want to make sure we solve it and solve it for good. But in the meantime, like, while you're doing all that digging, you want some help and some relief, so that way you don't have to just kind of withhold the negative symptoms, whatever that might be. So with that being said, a lot of people might think off the bat, or this is something that's being said, we don't naturally take, those negative symptoms, that they're not that obvious, if I can say that. Because most people, they'll say, oh, vitamin D deficiency, rickets. But that's like, kind of like, that's when it's hitting rock bottom, right? Like, we don't want to wait until it gets that bad, or, some people, it's when they're really young, until we say, hey, maybe we should check out this vitamin D thing. Like,
exactly.
What are some of the other symptoms we might be noticing if we have deficient vitamin D levels?
What else could you notice? Well, it's really hard to say because vitamin D has an effect on so many things. I'll just give you an example. My father during December came to me and he said, Justin, I want to let you know I've actually lost 10 pounds this month. And I said, that's great. I noticed you've been eating a little bit of bread and this and that, and you've been cutting your carbs and getting your insulin levels down. He goes, no, it's like my diet, I've kept it exactly the same. My routine's exactly the same. And I've lost 10 pounds this month just by upping my vitamin D 10,000 units, international units per day. I go, really? So then I go on PubMed and I'm like Googling and I'm like, oh, wow, there was a study 6 to 9 months ago in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition on postmenopausal females.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found was when they supplemented their vitamin D levels up to 2,000 IUs per day, controlling for exercise and controlling for diet, the group that got the modulatory, the higher level of vitamin D, lost the most weight and were able to keep it off. And I'm like, this is interesting. So then I go a little bit deeper into vitamin D and what could it be doing? And, it can have an effect on hormone synthesis. It can affect testosterone. It can affect estrogen levels. And when we're dealing with these things, it's going to have a modulatory effect. You're not going to like super saturate your hormones, but like you would if I was giving you topical testosterone or topical estrogen. We're not going to have that kind of effect, but there's a modulating, boosting effect. We see with testosterone. We also see an effect on insulin resistance, meaning it makes your cells more sensitive to insulin. So that's pretty cool. So I'm like, all right. I'm like, all right, Dad, you're not a postmenopausal female.
I was just gonna bring that up. I was like, wow, so it shows that it works on postmenopausal men as well.
You're not a postmenopausal female, thank God. But it makes sense. The mechanisms are in place in the literature, and there's some research on it affecting testosterone. So I think I don't think it's a giant leap to make the connection that is having a similar effect on your body, on the testosterone and on the insulin resistance side. And that's probably the reason why you're having this weight loss.
Yeah, definitely. So it's, like you mentioned, don't go out there and just, assume that, if you work out and you want to get super big, that you have to take an extreme amount. But what we're saying is that we do see a correlation and a connection. And even when you look at, your hormone pathways, we see, one of those beginning stages of your hormone pathways is, guess what, vitamin D and cholesterol. And you need those as building blocks, as foundation. So like you mentioned, there's probably some boosting, but not like a super saturated form, like in a modulating type of way in which you can kind of rebalance and kind of tell your body like, hey, this is the way that we're supposed to be running efficiently.
Yeah. And I read the abstract of this rat study, and again, it's a rat study. I just got to put it out there. But they found testosterone increased the synthesis, let's back up. Vitamin D increased the synthesis by the testes, making more testosterone in some of these rats. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And it makes sense that mechanism is more than likely happening in humans at some level. And we know it's happening in some of the females. We know it's having the insulin resistance effect. So, I mean, make sure your vitamin D. It's just another reason why you'd want to use vitamin D. So if you aren't motivated by the immune boosting and natural cancer benefits, well, get motivated by some of the aesthetic benefits.
Right, exactly. Right? Yeah. And like you mentioned, because it's, it affects our hormones, it affects our skin, and all these other things are. It's hard to pin down like, hey, I'm having this symptom. Do I have vitamin? Like, we can't kind of immediately do that, and that's probably why it's so important to make sure that, hey, just get a test. It's not that expensive. If you go into your doctors, make sure just make sure your vitamin D is getting tested, and it probably won't cost you anything extra. And if you have to go outside of your doctor, it won't cost you that much, right?
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll put a link in the show notes of just a way to my store where you can get vitamin D done super cheap. And I think it even comes with C-reactive protein too. So I'll put a link in. So if you want it, if you can't get it from your doctor, or you can't find a decent price, you can at least get it here pretty easily.
Yeah, exactly. So now we have a kind of like a baseline of like what's kind of happening, where do we mostly get it from, and then now it would probably be a good idea to understand what are how do I dose it, right? If I'm noticing that I'm low, or even if I'm at baseline, like how much should I be internally taking in if I'm taking a supplement? And with a supplement, is there superior form? Should I be taking it mixed with some vitamin K? Should I be taking it in a liquid form? What are some of the things when it comes to supplementation that you might tell some of your clients?
So when it comes to vitamin D, off the bat, vitamin K2 is going to be beneficial. I typically won't recommend it with vitamin K2 unless my patients have osteoporosis, they're a female, or if they're just avoiding like butter. Like if you're getting grass-fed butter in your diet, like I just had like a tablespoon or two in my coffee, right? I don't need vitamin K2 supplementation. I'm getting lots of grass-fed butter in my diet. I'm eating ghee. I am eating good quality meats that are going to have other fat-soluble nutrients. But if I'm looking at someone's diet and I'm not seeing vitamin K2 dietarily, then I'll put it in there. So I always want to make sure it's either coming in supplementally or it's coming in dietarily. Or if people just have a concern for bone health, we'll just add some extra vitamin K in there. So that's kind of step one off the bat. So if you feel like you're not eating butter and things like that, or definitely if you're a vegan, right, you want to get the vitamin K2 in there. But on that note, I typically recommend the vitamin D3 drops mixed in the beta MCT oil. So with the MCT, you're going to take that up enterohepatically, meaning you don't need bile salts to break it down because it's a fat-soluble nutrient, right? Vitamin A, D, E, and K. So you're going to be able to take it up naturally via the lymphatic system and not have to break it down with bile. So you get really good absorption. So the vitamin D drops are great. I'll put a link in of a couple of my favorite products. I like one by Thorne that's got the vitamin D3 and the vitamin K2. That's a really good one if you want the vitamin K2 as well. It's also a really good one by Designs for Health called the Multi D. I'll put that in the show notes. That's just a more concentrated form of vitamin D. Very good. And I right now I'm hitting up about 10,000 units a day, but a good general recommendation, go liquid if you can. If not, do the pill, but make sure your digestion's working. And a good recommendation off the bat is about 2,000 IUs per 25 pounds of body weight. So if you're 100 pounds, 10,000 off the bat for the first month is going to be, okay, excuse me, let me just back up. 1,000 IUs per 25 pounds. So if you're right around 100 pounds, 4,000 IUs will be great for the first month to start. If you're around 200 pounds, right around 8,000 IUs will be a pretty good place to start. And that's just a starting point. I don't recommend keeping that dose longer than a month. Just a good starting place. Again, Dr. Hollick, he's a researcher out of BU, prolific vitamin D researcher. He says that your body needs just about 2,000 IUs of vitamin D per day just at baseline, like just to kind of keep things level. So if you're kind of on the fence and you're like, I don't know, but I've been taking vitamin D and I haven't been, well, 2,000 IUs would just be a great baseline. If you're really uncertain and you're not ready to get tested yet, 2,000 would be a great place to start if you're uncertain.
Yeah, definitely. And this would probably be, especially for people that might maybe overweight or people that are older, or like you mentioned earlier, if you have darker skin, you might need a little bit more. You're at higher risk of being deficient. So these are certain examples. Another thing that you mentioned, and I don't think we've mentioned much on this show before, is the route. Because that these are fat soluble with the liquid. Explain to people what you mean by, it doesn't need bile salts to break down, and kind of what's happening when you take a sublingual fat soluble tincture versus taking something in, because somebody could just think like, oh, what if I just swallowed the liquid? They might not kind of catch that right off the bat. So tell us real quick about that pathway.
Okay. Well, there's some thought that we can absorb some of this if it's liquid sublingually, so kind of through our sublingual tissue and have it go right into the bloodstream. And also we know that when we take things like coconut oil or medium chain triglycerides, these are fatty acids that are 6 to 12 carbons long. And essentially these molecules can be taken up by our lymphatic system. Okay, our lymphatic system is kind of the intermediary between the tissue and the blood. Big thing is when we typically take in fats, like if you have a bolus of butter or a bolus of meat, your body's going to have your pancreas produce some enzymes, right? Like lipase, etc. And then also your gallbladder's going to spit out some fat. Excuse me, it's going to spit out some bile which is going to emulsify and break down the fat. So we got some lipase coming from the pancreas, we got some bile coming from the gallbladder, and this is going to help break down that fat, essentially emulsify it so then we can absorb it. The nice thing is when we do something on the medium chain triglyceride side of things, we can absorb it enterohepatically, meaning just take it up through the lymph glands, and we don't need this whole bile output. And this is great because I can't tell you how many patients I see these days that don't have gallbladders.
Yeah.
They don't have gallbladders, and their digestion stinks because they got gut infections and they're not absorbing their nutrients. So I'm a little more biased towards the vitamin D. Again, you got people out there like the drug industry and conventional medicine starting to get hip with this. They're just doing 50,000 IUs one time per week. Not really a fan of that because you typically won't just go outside and just get your bolus of vitamin D just at one time, right? Because the most you can make at about 1 unit is about 20,000. So I don't like to go over 20,000 unless it's an acute issue like an infection. So, getting it daily is going to be a better thing. And I'm a bigger fan of doing it in the morning. Well, I mean, it kind of makes sense because vitamin D is made with the sun. So why would you get a whole whack of vitamin D at 9, 10 o'clock at night when the sun's down? I know there are a lot of protocols out there that say, hey, do your vitamin D at night. It'll have a calming effect. But I just like to use my noggin a little bit and say, well, would our body normally make vitamin D at 10 o'clock at night?
Yeah, exactly. And I kind of think the same thing, like, oh, if I take a supplement that might have a little bit of vitamin D in there, okay, and I take the Thorn, so there's not going to be that much in the afternoon, but there is a heavier amount in the morning, and they did it in that specific reason. Like, there's kind of this expectation of what our body's expecting and what naturally occurs, and you kind of want to do as best you can to match up with nature. I mean, unless I guess you work the night shift, then you might benefit from doing it the opposite way.
You may. That's a good point.
So but yeah, so just let's basically what you're saying is like let's be smart about this and always try to match it up to try and follow nature as much as possible, even if that's supplementing. These are natural things that us as humans have built, but we've been able to kind of, you kind of coexist with this technology. So the stuff that we had that we know is good, try to match our technology with what's natural. And, so one of the best things you can do is take that in the morning. And that's the same way, at the same time, I supplement my vitamin D.
That's smart, man. That's really good. And I just kind of wanted to summarize everything. I think we went on to the show being like, oh, we're going to talk about vitamin D and immune boosting support, but I think there was just so much to talk about. We're going to just keep this podcast just focused to vitamin D, and I think we'll do a part 2 talking about other ways to kind of boost the immune system outside of vitamin D next week.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
Is there anything else you want to touch upon, Baris?
I think we got most of it. For the listeners out there, send us any of the questions that you may have about vitamin D, and maybe we can throw that in. I'm going to make sure that I take that down, questions about vitamin D. So you can go to beyondwellnessradio.com, and there's this place right there that you can click and ask away, and you can ask your questions, and we can go ahead and put your answer on the show. So I think we got most of it, and if there's any other questions, we'll just make sure you guys go ahead and send that in, so that way we can get those answers for you.
Great.
But with that being said, I think we did a really good job kind of breaking down and giving our listeners a foundation. Anything else that you maybe want to add?
Well, I just want to set people up here, so if they got a little glossy-eyed with all the big words and just it kind of made it, maybe it was a little bit over their head, I'm going to just break it down. So if they listen to this quick 30 seconds here, they'll get all of the key points.
Yeah.
All right. So vitamin D3 in your supplements coming in, converted to the liver to 25 hydroxy vitamin D, calcidiol, and then converted by the kidneys to calcitriol, your active vitamin D. Vitamin D upregulates 800 different genes. Cancer protective vitamin D is shown to people with higher vitamin D levels are resistant to the flu. It helps balance your Th1 and Th2 immune system, right? Your Th1 are like the special forces that go out to go kill everything off the bat. Your Th2 are the forces that stay behind and come out in about a week. Those are your antibodies. It helps your Th3 system, your T regulatory cells. It really balances out your immune system. And if your vitamin D levels aren't going up, look a little deeper. There could be an infection. You could be having vitamin D receptor site downregulation. So we want to run that 125 hydroxy D. If our 25 hydroxy D isn't going up with supplementation, let's take the 125 hydroxy. And then a good starting point, if you're uncertain, is 2,000 IUs per day, or anywhere between 5 to 10,000 IUs, depending on body weight, for the first month. And if anyone listening is uncertain and wants to get tested, check out below the show notes to get more information on how to easily do that. And I think that's it, Baris.
Yeah, we went over a lot of stuff in that time. So for you guys, thank you guys so much for listening. We always appreciate it. With that being said, next time on the show, we'll get into the immune system part of it. And we'll go ahead and break that stuff down for you guys and get you guys as much as you guys need. So again, go to beyondwellnessradio.com and hit that subscribe to the newsletter. This will keep you up to date as much as possible. Also, we would greatly appreciate if you went to iTunes and left us a review. So with that being said, you guys have a good one. Thank you for coming on, Dr. Justin. You have a good one.
Thanks, Baris.
Got a question for Dr. J? Go to beyondwellnessradio.com/question. Then tune in to hear the answer. Also, if you like the show, review us on iTunes. For more Beyond Wellness Radio, go to beyondwellnessradio.com.